In case we're not clear regarding what Jesus meant by the narrow way, he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. You see, when you tell people, I believe in Jesus, and you have to believe in Jesus if you're going to go to heaven according to the Bible, and they say, I don't believe the Bible. I just don't believe in Jesus. Some will say, well, I don't believe in what Jesus said. Some say, when you say Jesus is the only way or one way, well, I don't agree with that. I believe that there are many ways to God. Jesus is a way, but he's not the only way. There are some who will tell you that they believe that everything is God, which is the New Age. They even say that you and I can be God. And some say, it really doesn't matter what you believe. If you're comfortable in believing that, that's fine. I believe in this or that. So when you present to them that Jesus Christ is the narrow way and he's the only way, they don't listen. But regardless of these doubts and excuses, the scriptures tell us, in fact, Jesus said it, we are to be witnesses. It's not an option. Witnessing is for all believers. Witnessing begins at home. Jesus said in Jerusalem. Then he said Judea and Samaria, that's surrounding home. And then he said to the uttermost parts of the earth. Witnessing involves outreach, proclaiming who Jesus is to others everywhere. How can I use creation? Because I've tried it before and people just laugh at me. I don't really have a background in science, so I'm not educated in some of the things that these people with credentials have, and so I just can't deal with it. I don't have the information that I can confront people who are evolutionists. They're smarter than me. Some say, well, leave that up to preachers or scientists. But I want to challenge every one of you. You can be a creation evangelist. And as we've looked already at the scriptures, we know that there's this pattern throughout the Old Testament that whenever man removes God from his thinking and trusts in his own reasoning, then he strays far from God, and then God brings judgment. That's what happened from the fall, and that's why there was a flood. Because the Creator who made Adam and Eve was removed far away because man trusted in himself and then followed the fallen spiritual dimension. And things were so wicked and perverted, God had to destroy. There was a judgment. And the evidence that God judged in a worldwide flood is for us to see around the world. The time of the Tower of Babel, when the people rebelled against God and they began to worship the gods, God was angered by what they were doing. And of course, he stopped the building of the tower and they were dispersed. God was angry. And the societies that we see worldwide continued to do what they had done at Babel. And when we read in the Old Testament that the children of Israel were instructed to be obedient to God and his word, we find that they too rebelled and became involved with the pagan practices of the ancients, and they were judged. That's the pattern. So if that is what has occurred in the past, and if history repeats itself, and there's nothing new under the sun, then when we see today a revival of ancient Babylonianism and people practicing various kinds of witchcraft, occultic practices, and we are told that this is in the name of science and New Age and enlightenment and elevation of consciousness, what does God think about this? The Creator. Well, it's very clear. If it was an abomination to God in the past, then it's an abomination to God today. And if the world's going to embrace this, as is happening, and the Bible says when that happens, there'll be a judgment, shouldn't we consider what God has said? You see, if we're going to be effective in witnessing to the generation, the people today, then we must be able to tell them, we must need to tell them that the God of the new age is the God of this world, who is Satan. And that the new age is not new. It's not the new science. It's not the new biology. It's not evolution in this lifetime through the serpent power. What this is the same old deception that has occurred throughout the generations, and man is being duped and caught up in Satan's schemes and being deceived. And the fact is, from a biblical perspective, that judgment is coming. It's happened in the past. It will happen again. Now, that's not an easy message, but it's the truth. You see, creation evangelism is not only telling people that there is a creator, that there has been a creation, and that they are accountable to the creator because of their sin. It's telling them that there's a way out. We don't have to face the judgment. And today, when we share with people who have embraced pagan practices of the ancients, these are the things that we need to say in love. Number one, the Bible gives God's perspective of the new age when it happened in the past. The Bible gives God's perspective of the new age that is underway today. Thirdly, the Bible gives God's perspective of the new age that will unfold in the future. And fourthly, there is an urgency to tell people about God's perspective of the new age. And let me repeat this. There's an urgency to tell people. Why? Because if they don't know the truth, they spend eternity in hell. And we live in a society today where people are saying, don't rock the boat. Let's just all try to get along. Many churches are moving in the direction, they call it seeker-friendly. Don't offend anybody. I have gone to churches recently where they say, don't tell people about evolution, or at least speak critically about it. Many of our people will leave. Things are changing. But the facts remain the same. That in our generation, we have seen a situation which is preparing us to accept the gods. That is, the practices of the ancient pagans. In a society which boldly proclaims we have intellectually discovered all that we can discover through man's ways, a society that has willingly chosen to reject the Creator through evolution, we are going to see that we are following on the same pathway as the ancients. There is nothing new under the sun, and that history is being repeated. This is Darwin's home. I visited several times, but the last time was October 12, 2002. It's been made into a museum. There you'll see numerous books about Darwin, posters on the walls. What an influential man. He shaped the minds of billions. And there you see I'm pointing to a picture of Pope John Paul II, and the year is 1996. And it was that year in October where he declared that God used evolution. Charles Darwin, of course, is often called the father of evolution, but certainly he is only one of numerous contributors. And as we look into his life, in fact, as we read his own testimony of some of the things that he said in the latter parts of his life, we can see that Darwin himself used evolution as a means of explaining away God. Here's his autobiography, the only complete edition. And by the way, it wasn't published until 100 years after his death by the request of his family, because of a number of things which he stated. I will quote to you. But I had gradually come by this time to see that the Old Testament, from its manifestly false history of the world, with the Tower of Babel, the rainbow as a sign, etc., and from its attributing to God the feelings of a revengeful tyrant, was no more to be trusted than the sacred books of the Hindus or the beliefs of any barbarian. So you see, he once believed and then he doubted and then, he was very disgruntled. And then he makes this statement. Thus disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate, but was at last complete. The rate was so slow that I felt no distress, and have never since doubted even for a single second that my conclusion was correct. I can indeed hardly see how anyone ought to wish Christianity to be true, for if so, the plain language of the text seems to show that the men who do not believe, and this would include my father, brother, and almost all my best friends, will be everlastingly punished. And this is a damnable doctrine. Charles Darwin stated in his own writings that believing in Christianity, which is based on believing in a creator, and believing that man is separated from the creator because of sin, as he describes it, as a damnable doctrine. And you see, for him, evolution was that way he could explain away his accountability to the creator. And when you go into the Westminster Abbey, you will note that his grave, well, you can't miss it. You will walk right over top of it. It's right in the central walkway. I asked the guide while I was there, why would Charles Darwin be buried here? I went and I asked the librarian the same question. Why would Darwin be buried here? And he took me to a shelf and he pulled down a book, and this is what I read. From the book by Ronald Clark, The Survival of Charles Darwin, a biography of a man and an idea, page 197, I quote. Following his death, which occurred April 19th, 1882, his family planned to bury him in the cemetery at Down where he lived. But on April 21st, 20 members of Parliament, including Henry Campbell Bannerman, the future Prime Minister of England, wrote the Dean of Westminster, Dr. George Granville Bradley, and stated the following: "We hope you will not think we are taking the liberty if we venture to suggest that it would be acceptable to a very large number of our fellow countrymen of all classes and opinions that our illustrious countryman, Mr. Darwin, should be buried in Westminster Abbey." See, he was a very famous person. They wanted him buried there. But it's very clear by his own testimony, he was not a believer. They will reject the truth, and the context here is creation, and Paul says they will accept the lie. What is the opposite of creation? Evolution. And he continues, "For this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use in that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which was meat." What is Paul talking about? Well, it's very simple. He says men with men, women with women, homosexuality. And isn't it interesting that in the news currently, this is exactly what we hear? And by the way, to say anything about this publicly, that is to speak against it from the Bible, well, it could be a hate crime. That's the direction that society is headed. But Paul says this is exactly what you can expect when you remove God from man's thinking. Man begins to make his own rules. Verse 29, "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them." You see, the Bible describes a scenario of human behavior, of what takes place when man removes God from his thinking, when he rejects the evidence of creation. And when we look around us in the world today, the very things that Paul describes are the things that are happening.